Hello and good day, good morning, good afternoon, buenas tardes. I'm Anthea Hartig, the Elizabeth Macmillan Director of the National Museum of American History at your Smithsonian Institute. And I want to welcome you to this important discussion of social justice on film. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I want to acknowledge the precedents of the Piscataway, the Pamunkey, and the Nacotchunk peoples and their descendants. Wherever we are tuning in today, let us acknowledge and give our respects to Native peoples for the opportunity to work and live in their territories. Let us just pause as well, reflect as we begin our time together today, and acknowledge the moment of these intersecting crises: viral, racial, economic, climate, and political. The individual and collective grief and loss and fear we've experienced during these pandemics, which have, of course, disproportionately affected people of color, is why conversations like the one we're having today are incredibly meaningful and poignant. At the National Museum of American History, our mission is empowering people to create a more just and compassionate future by exploring, preserving, and sharing the complexity of our past. Our collections are vast, and we are working to make sure that objects, people, and stories that we share accurately reflect the diversity of our nation through all of our content and across time. Entertainment, film, television, sports, theater, music can bring our nation together and foster important conversations by causing us to dig deeper, get vulnerable, and feel each other's pain and joy. I encourage you to stay tuned for future information about our upcoming Entertaining America exhibition. But today, I'm thrilled that we have esteemed guests who are deeply committed to the topic of social justice on film. I think they're joining me on the screen. It's an honor to introduce first two of my beloved inspirational colleagues, two curators at the museum, Dr. John Troutman, whose work focuses on American music and entertainment, and Dr. Modupe Labode, whose work focuses on African American social justice. Joining them are David Lindy, CEO of Participant Media. I think there he is, Participant. David is responsible for leading the company's overall strategy, content creation, advocacy, operations, strategic investments, and acquisitions. And previously, David served as the chairman of Universal Pictures and was co-founder of Focus Features, among many other roles there. Dawn Porter is the director of John Lewis, Good Trouble. Dawn is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work has appeared on national and global platforms, including HBO, PBS, Discovery, and Netflix. In addition to John Lewis' Good Trouble, her film, The Way I See It, about chief White House photographer for Presidents Obama and Reagan, was recently released. And Vernon Jordan, Make It Plain, will premiere in December. Dawn is also currently directing and executive producing an Apple TV multi-part documentary series with Oprah Winfrey and Prince Harry that focuses on mental illness and well-being. Steve James is the director of City So Real. Steve is a director, producer, cinematographer, and editor who is a two-time Academy Award nominee who has earned 4 Directors Guild of America DGA Award nomination and winning for one of my favorites, 1994, tell how old I am, Hoop Dreams. He's also known for Stevie, The Interrupters, Life Itself, America to Me, and Abacus, Small Enough to Jail, which earned him his 2nd Oscar nomination. Thank you all so much for being here, and I'm so looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you, Anthea, for that really wonderful introduction. I'd like to provide a roadmap for our time together this afternoon. We're first going to kick things off with a reel that provides an overview of Participant Media. Then we'll speak first with each of the others individually, First with David Lindy from Participant Media, who's played an integral role in the films that we'll be talking about today. Then we'll have moved to short Q&As with each director. First with Don Porter, director of John Lewis' Good Trouble, and then with Steve James, director of City So Real, before bringing back everyone together to talk about film and social change. So now, The Reel providing an overview of Participant Media.
You are not a viewer. You're not an audience member. This is a film about you. You're in every scene. You are a participant. These are your tears. This is your strength.
That's a third-degree Ginsburg.
This is your joy. Your journey. You can't turn it off. There will be no end credits.
There is a moment when you have to choose whether to be silent or to stand up.
So don't act like you're not powerful. Like you don't have a voice.
It takes courage to change people's hearts.
Don't act like you need permission.
It is right to give hope to the future generation.
Just act.
David, it's great to have you with us today. I think that we all saw some very familiar films in that piece, and it really sets up nicely some of the themes that we're going to be thinking about today, both in terms of your work and the work of filmmakers that you collaborate with. The research for our upcoming exhibition, Entertaining America, originally drew us to Participant, which is self-described, similar to our exhibition, as dedicated to entertainment that inspires audiences to engage in positive social change. Now, this is not quite your typical mission for a commercially successful Hollywood production company operating at your scale, I can't imagine. So I'm wondering if you could just tell us a bit about, how Participant came about and why it came about.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for having me, and on behalf of everybody at Participant, thank you for all the work that you do, and it's really been a immense pleasure to get to know everybody in the organization and be able to be a very small part of it. So thank you for everything. We like to think of ourselves as the reflection of our founder, who is Jeff Skoll, who was the first employee of eBay and now philanthropist, and we're part of several of Jeff's organizations, including the Skoll Foundation, which supports social entrepreneurs all around the world and does really super amazing work. And his vision is creating a world of more peace and prosperity for everyone in the world, a sustainable world of peace and prosperity for everyone in the world. And it's the vision that we live every single day, and we try to follow it religiously. So the company has been in existence for 16 years, and we are the storytelling part of Jeff's organizations. And the company and he has always believed that movies and TV series can provide a different form of inspiration that leads to a different form of engagement for people who might not otherwise see themselves as advocates, or see the opportunity to be advocates, or to engage in positive social change. And so what we really seek to do with audiences that see our content is sort of create a fourth act for them, in a sense, for those who want to participate. And we like to say that we inspire, our films inspire people. The work that we do with impact organizations around the world empowers people to engage in positive change. And last but not least, when it really works as well as possible, connecting so many different impact organizations, audiences, our distributors, connecting them together at any one moment really does have the opportunity to scale up the change that people are working on.
So as we saw in the introductory reel, participant media is involved in a huge range of film projects, from feature films to digital shorts, television series. I think I saw that you're involved with Spike Lee's direction of a David Byrne music review. So for those of us who are not familiar with how the movies we watch come into being, could you walk us through the decision-making process by which you identify projects to support? And what does it mean for participants to support these? So basically, in short, what is it that participant media does?
That's a very, we do a lot, obviously, but Jeff has gifted us with sort of 6 areas to think about when including public health, and obviously climate change is incredibly important to this company. And we use those sort of matrix of issue areas in thinking about all the content that we're considering to create. But not unlike traditional film studios or producers, we have departments. We have a documentary film department. We have what we call a narrative film department. We have a very small episodic television department. And they go about deciding what content that we're going to pursue, or what stories we're going to pursue in a fairly traditional way, working with artists primarily, often writer-directors, in seeking out films that we really feel speak to the issues that we care so deeply about and are so meaningful to us. And so that's sort of the difference. The difference is that we have real guideposts to follow in terms of what it is, the kinds of stories that we're trying to tell. But the way that we go about it is not different from traditional film studios or film producers, which is we work with artists to develop the material in the forms of screenplays, and then adding or including directors and building the films and episodic series as we go along. So that's not that unusual, right? It's different, and I think that people are increasingly understanding the value of our perspective, right? Is that audiences around the world, we know as consumers, audiences are consumers also, and we know that people are more deeply paying deeper attention to the way that they look at what they consume and the value of what they consume, whether it's a film or buying a pair of sneakers, quite honestly. And we offer a different kind of value, and that's very much about Jeff's vision, right? Is that being within engaging in a participant movie is often a different kind of experience. It's intended to be entertaining, it's intended to be inspirational, but it gives you something a little bit more. And then the real differentiator, I think, ultimately between us and any other film company is our social impact work. And we have a social impact department, what we call a social impact department. And what they do is on all of our films, and especially the ones that are really, really, to issue, and where there's really an identifiable piece of work that we can do, they spend an immense amount of time, once they have a sense of what the movie is and who it will appeal to, they go out in the world and they work with what we call impact organizations, which could be the Sierra Club, it could be the ACLU, it could be Fair Fight, most recently in some work that we did with Dawn's film in Georgia. who are the really boots on the ground activists. And we've built really long-standing relationships with people where they understand that the film itself can be a catalyst to the conversation that they're engaging around, that they're advocating on behalf. And essentially what we do is we partner with these organizations to provide them obviously access to the content itself, but also to use all the experience that we've had in community building and community engagement to use our content and also other pieces of content that we might create, like social media content or anything like that, to accelerate the work that they're doing, right? And really try to push forward the work around any particular issue. And that is a differentiator. And one of the biggest pleasures for me, I've been at the company now for 5 years, and it's really been a blessing for me personally, to be honest. But one of the really great things that we're seeing is that the people who enable us to get the movies to the audiences, our distributors, film studios, the streamers of the world and things like that, are increasingly beginning to identify the value of the conversation that we're creating, right? That effectively what we're doing is engaging an audience that might not otherwise be engaged, because we're essentially giving them an opportunity to experience the content in a different way, and then take the steps that I was talking about, engagement, community building. And that's been incredibly satisfying to see over the past couple of years, that the distributors are really seeing, because they have this immense power, right, to get the films to the people. And now they're really seeing what I was talking about in the very beginning, which is audiences are interested. Right, they're interested in the opportunity, and that's been incredibly great.
Well, that's been something was really interesting for Modipe and I to think about and to talk about, was this idea of the audience and your ability to access such broad audiences through these distribution channels, but then to connect them to your fourth act, as you described it, is really fascinating and so different. I'm thinking about the National Domestic Workers Alliance program that you developed through Roma, kind of connecting with that film. But there's so many examples that are just unique and specific to particular issues. And you had mentioned Fair Fight as well, and this might be a good time for us also to ask you, as we begin to move into a deeper dive into those, to Don's film and to Steve's film, how did Participant come to work with Don and Steve on these particular projects?
Well, Don is somebody that we have an immense amount of respect for. And we did not develop John Lewis Good Trouble. John Lewis Good Trouble was developed by CNN Films with Don and the other producers. And when we got wind of it, and we've worked with CNN Films a lot. We worked with them on RBG, for instance, which is a film that we collaborated with them on, and they have a great relationship with them. And we got wind that this film was in development and was being made, and basically crawled, I would have crawled all the way to New York City to get involved in this movie. So it was developed and produced by CNN Films, and we came on to the film in post-production. And I think that's one of the most important things is, you think about documentaries which take, sometimes, if it takes 2 years to make a documentary film, you're lucky, right? They often take 3, sometimes 4 years, right? Yeah. And one of the most important things I think for us is, and why the relationship with artists is so important, and then I'll just jump to Steve quickly, is they're really seeing around the corner, right? We like to say they see around the corner about issues. And so, it's an incredibly, I think, a good reflection of Dawn is that she knew that this movie had to be made, right? Yeah. And that she could develop such a trusting relationship with the congressman, well in advance of 2020, or even 2019. And I think that's one of the key things that we sort of so benefit from is an artist's ability to foresee what is going to be important to us. And the other thing that's super important for us is relationships with filmmakers, that the sort of having an ongoing relationship with a filmmaker and doing multiple films with them makes our work easier to the extent it can be easier, right? And sort of beginning to develop, relationships are key to us. We see ourselves as a partnership organization. We partner with great artists, we partner with the best distributors in the world, and we partner with these amazing impact organizations. And the more continuity that we can have, you begin to learn the same language, right? And things become easier to do. So the first thing we did with Steve was the television series America to Me, which broadcast on Stars a few years ago, which was a look at the realities of public school education at the Oak Park School outside of Chicago, but really is representative of the very, very important conversation around equity in public education. And so, which started out as a movie and ended up as a 10-part series. And he did an unbelievable job. So Steve brought us City So Real a couple of years ago now. And I think originally, actually, he works very closely with our chief content officer, Diane Wireman, who's been with Jeff forever, I think, almost 14 years. And she's sort of, she's got the mantra, right? She understands what we need to be making and how to go about it. And so they have a really close relationship. And he brought us City So Real a couple of years ago. And, what's amazing about Steve, just as with Don, right, is his ability to see how looking maybe at something that might seem quite specific, right, is actually about looking at all of us, right, and is having a conversation about all of us. So I like to think of City So Real as a story of American cities, not just Chicago. And I think that's one of the reasons that National Geographic was so enthusiastic about being our distribution partner, right, was because they saw that it could really touch people, that it would have real relevance and connection to people around the country.
Well, we saw that too, and we're excited to talk to him more about that specific relationship you're describing between the city and the country, the issues that affect us all. So thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it. If you don't mind, just hold on. We're gonna bring Dawn in, speak with her for a bit, and then Steve, and then we're gonna bring everybody in after that. So thank you so much for your time. Hi, Dawn Porter. How are you doing? Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us for a little while today. John Lewis Good Trouble is an amazing film. And congratulations this week for the Critics' Choice Award for Best Historical or Biographical Documentary. That's so exciting and so well-deserved.
Thank you. Yes, very exciting. So glad to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, we're just gonna dive in. Modupe and I both have a few questions, and we're gonna run a couple of clips as well. So we'll just dive in. But one thing that we were struck with in your film was the degree to which John Lewis seemed quite aware of the power of storytelling. Telling his story in very particular ways through certain anecdotes from his life, whether it's from preaching to his chickens as a boy, or setting off, describing his setting off to march across the Pettus Bridge. And so much so, in fact, as your film reveals, that his former staff, there's one scene where they're kind of reciting the lines of the stories. But it's interesting because he must have recognized storytelling's power and honed his storytelling to connect strangers to his story early on in his life. And so I'm wondering, what did you learn or take away from his craft of storytelling? And what stories of his did you feel you needed to tell that perhaps had not been adequately expressed by him or others?
Those are great questions. You can see Mr. Lewis's repetition of certain stories in a number of ways. You could see it as a person who's famous, who tells the stories that answers the questions that everybody wants to ask. But as I spent about a year with him, not continuously, but back and forth. And what I began to see is something that I think is also really a mission of the museum, which is his storytelling, his way of recalling this history is very reminiscent to me of the African-American experience of keeping an oral tradition alive. And so if you think about the stories that he tells, he not only is telling his story, he's telling a lot of the story of so many Black people in America. So he tells a story about his parents and how hard it was for them to survive as sharecroppers. He tells a story about seeing injustice. He constantly reminds us of the place from which he came. So in seeing the really lyrical beauty of his storytelling, I wanted to highlight that and put that together for people, but also make sure that he added in some context for us in other ways. So both honoring his storytelling and the power of his storytelling. The thing I love about documentaries so much is you go in with an idea, but your approach to a film evolves as you get to know your subject in a personal way and not from a distance. So with Mr. Lewis, as I started to hear the cadence of his stories, I wanted to place him in certain places. So church, right? It was so important to see him telling those stories in church and bringing his audience along the way every good preacher does, so that people see themselves in his stories, they are inspired by his stories, and they're motivated to act. And good preachers, that is what they do, right? This was in a political sense, but that is also what happens in religion, is you see yourself in a religious fable or story, you work out some issues you have, and you leave Sunday hopefully filled up and ready to take on the week. So I really enjoyed watching him in that, because, he really did want to preach. That was not a small thing for him. He really did want to preach. And that was foundational to him. But there is also this tradition of oral storytelling in the African American community that he is continuing. And I thought that this was a way to honor his really continuing that tradition on purpose. John Lewis could have, he did use every form of communication. He wrote books, he appeared in movies, he spoke on the floor of the House of Representatives, but he also really loved the oral tradition. And I wanted to honor that. And that, last thing I'll say about that is what led me to the creative decision to have him speak full to camera, because it's who should tell John Lewis's story more than John Lewis at almost 80 years old, seeing what he's seen, living the American life that he has lived. I wanted to fill the screen with him and his voice so that you could not look anywhere else. There was nothing else to see. You had to focus your full attention on what he was trying to share and impart. So,
Dawn, that's a really great segue, because we want to highlight some of your storytelling as well. And we're going to bring up a clip, and this is in the Nashville protests. And it's kind of want to show exactly how you juxtapose John Lewis today with the looking at himself over 50 years ago. So I'd like to let people know that this clip includes scenes of racial violence and slurs against Black people. If that's something you don't want to see, we'll be back in just over a minute. Okay, so the clip should be coming up.
We organized in Nashville, John Lewis, Diane Nash, and the others.
It was on February the 13th, and we had the very first sit-in here in Nashville. And I took my seat at the counter. I asked the waitress for a hamburger and a Coke.
I said, I'm sorry, our management does not allow us to serve niggers in here.
Altogether, it was a moving feeling within me that I was sitting there demanding a God-given right. And in spite of all of this, I had to keep loving the people who denied me service.
They come in and they sit down, and we're not used to them sitting down beside us, because I wasn't raised with them. I never have lived with them, and I'm not going to start now.
First, we had to change. And since we were no longer going to accept segregated lunch counters, it was over with. We protested because we had changed. We continued to give them the opportunity to also change because we believed that it was possible.
So it's always hard to see those films. How did you arrive at the strategy of having John Lewis in the 21st century addressing or speaking to himself in the 20th century? And I think right before that clip, he was saying, he says to you, I don't think I've seen this clip before.
Yeah. Thank you for showing that. That is absolutely one of my favorite scenes in the movie because it shows, I think even in the face of such brutality, the optimism and determination of the civil rights workers. Saying we give them the opportunity to change is really interesting framing, but also is that we had changed. People always would say what motivated the congressman, and because he was changed, because he refused to live in a world that accepted him as anything less than a full human being. And that was how all of those young people felt. So so we talked about the benefits of Mr. Lewis's storytelling, but the downside of that for a filmmaker is he would repeat the same stories over and over. So what I felt like one of my challenges was, we had the opportunity to have a living historical legend and to ask him questions. So I wanted to kind of get him off script a little bit, to take us behind the scenes of some of those moments. We were in Brian Stevenson's beautiful Civil Rights Museum in Alabama with him. And Brian Stevenson does a very smart thing, which is he forbids cameras, which is annoying to a filmmaker. But what it meant is, like I always tell my children, I had to put my phone down and experience the exhibits. And so Mr. Lewis wasn't always on his phone. He was experiencing the exhibits. And we came upon an exhibit that was about him. And it was footage of him. And he is watching it. I'm watching him watch it. And he shakes his head and he says, sometimes I can't believe that's me. And even he was still stunned that he had the audacity to do so many things. And then he turned to, there was a teenager on tour in the museum, and he starts telling a story about that day that we were watching that I'd never heard. And I thought, oh, that's what we should do. Show him films about the and ask him to tell us the story of those days, because just like you've had the experience of looking at photograph albums and you see things as an adult that you never focused on as a child, I think he was seeing his life in ways that he hadn't necessarily focused on because he didn't spend a lot of time watching movies of himself. So, and this is where great producers come in. So my producers, Laura and Michael Shizen, and I said, I'd really like to rent a theater in Washington, D.C. and construct 3 large screens and have 5 cameras and 40 people and make small movies about John Lewis and show them to him. And I would like to do that in like 3 weeks. And she said, okay. So we rented the arena stage, and that's what we did. And an unintended, particularly since he is now passed, but an unintended incredible experience of my life is that we had that day with him because his chief of staff told us that it was one of his favorite days. And, Mr. Lewis is not a person to revel in his own successes or glories. That was not what interested in him. And I, as a Black person, appreciated that because too many of our Black leaders are very concerned with themselves. And he was concerned with the past so that we didn't repeat the mistakes. he was not concerned with personal glory. So to have the opportunity to have him watch those things. So when he says, I'm seeing things I've never seen before, I think he was also talking about the totality of it, of having the space and the quiet to appreciate how awesome it was that he and these other 19-year-old people did this thing for us, for all of us, integrating Nashville, the first city to become integrated.
Well, our time unfortunately has just flown by. I do want to thank you so much for this wonderful insight and your experience of working with the late Congressman. I think your film, for many people, was not just only an introduction, but also an elegy for him. And so I think it's been, it has a big place because it was released only a few weeks before he died.
Yeah.
So we would really like to thank you for this very short conversation, and we'll bring you back with David Lindy and Steve for kind of a more interchange. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Hi, Steve.
Hello.
Thank you for joining our round robin of. I'm excited. We're both excited to bring everybody back in here shortly to speak together and with one another about these films and the relationship between filmmaking and social change. But we do want to dive in a little bit to City So Real. Modipe and I were both really just so intrigued by it, so struck by it. It's a 5-part documentary series. It's just released with support of participant through National Geographic, and it's available on other mediums as well now, platforms. And it's a series that follows the 2019 mayoral race in Chicago through the summer of 2020.
Actually, 18 through 19.
Oh, excuse me, 18 through 19, and then into 20. But it's even much more than that, because it's incredibly far-reaching, not only into the daily rhythms of what seemed like just about every neighborhood in Chicago, but into some of our most important current national conversations. It's really powerful, striking, extraordinarily intimate exchanges that take place and interactions in the film. So we just want to dive right in, and we thought we'd begin with a clip that speaks to the mechanics of democracy in Chicago. It speaks to how mayoral candidates even get on the ballot. At the beginning, I think there were maybe 20 people who are seeking to get on the ballot. They had to each secure, 12,500 legitimate signatures.
Yeah, they're required to have 12,500, but if they want to get on the ballot, the rule of thumb was have 3 times that amount.
3 times that amount. And so this clip that we want to share, it's so fascinating because it reveals how campaign managers would review and object to signatures on their adversaries' petitions in an effort to eliminate the competition with these poor election officials always stuck in between them. And so we'd love just to jump into this and then to ask you about it.
Frustrating for the candidates to have put all of this time and effort into gathering signatures, to have objections that are totally baseless.
We live in a democracy, so they have a choice to do this right here. They may make it difficult for the candidate, but it's a process.
Make it difficult for us. No, well, I mean, these decisions haven't been difficult for you, though. They're clearly not good objections. The last couple that we've looked at have been, they said that you didn't live at that address, and sure enough, you pull it up on the screen, that's the name. Or maybe they took a blunderbuss and they just sprayed it all over the place, or like throwing darts at the dartboard saying, we're going to object to this one, we're going to object to that one. Okay. Sorry, I get a little heated.
My decision is my decision. You're going to object to it, and we're going to move on. Okay. All right.
We're going to object or overrule, so I have to say object when it's an overrule, right? So
you asking me?
Yeah.
You say what again?
We say object when it's overruled, right? So we're going to object all the overrules. Okay. So if that was overruled,
What's your
I say
objection
object.
to that?
I'm not sure. I just know we're supposed to. Did you look at the signature? I just know we're supposed to object. I know the signature on the page matched exactly. Okay. That. Okay. So are you still going to object? Yeah, we're going to object all the overrules.
Okay. So. All right. So.
913. Overrule.
Going to overrule on the signature.
We're going to object.
Overrule line number 3.
Object. I am overruling both signature and the address.
I object to both.
Okay, so this is a really interesting, somewhat tedious aspect of the electoral machinery in Chicago. So I wondered what surprised you as you took a deep dive into just the mechanics of how people got into the ballot, and what aspects seemed uniquely Chicago, for better or for worse?
Yeah, great questions. Seeing that now, given what the country's going through around challenges to voting, it has particular resonance, right? I knew that the petition process was part of the gamesmanship of Chicago politics, but I was completely naive as to the level and the Byzantine level that it would reach. It's a situation where you have these callers like you saw in the clip, and they will, one candidate will challenge another candidate's signature petitions, and they'll look at them individually, and then they will make a ruling. And as it turns out, the caller's ruling means nothing, because every ruling the caller can make can be challenged, and that would mean that it would go to another level, a handwriting analyst often, and it might eventually involve the actual voter coming in and signing an affidavit saying, yes, I did sign that petition. So it's, in Chicago, I think that level of gamesmanship is fairly unique, although it goes on in all cities, you can challenge. But I think, in Chicago, first of all, the fact that you need 12,500 valid signatures to run for mayor is way more than New York City or LA, for example. It's even more than to run for governor of Illinois, which is kind of interesting. And so, as I said at the beginning, the rule of thumb is you need to get 3 times as many just to make your way through the challenge. And it doesn't mean that 2/3 of your signatures were invalid at all. It just means they got challenged and they were prevailed. The challenge prevailed in some fashion. So it's, one of the people in the film says in Chicago, politics is a blood sport. And I think this petition process, you see it because it's really designed to tie up a candidate, tie up their resources, frustrate them, and prevent them from campaigning or knowing that they're even going to be on the ballot for as long a period of time as possible. And of course, possibly throwing them off the ballot.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think one of just the real kind of beautiful aspects of the film is that there's a constant kind of pull, it seems, between kind of imagining this film as you chronicling a mayoral race in Chicago versus you chronicling Chicago through a mayoral race. I mean, everything is there. It's so rich, and that's expressed, in just in a lot of the more kind of dramatic and exchanges that are featured in the series. And I'd like for us to move on to the next clip, which focuses on a town hall meeting for what seems to be mostly high school students seeking to express issues and concerns that are important to them to several of the folks who were in the race for mayor.
Our next question comes from Irving from Juarez High School.
So recently in Pilsen, there was a woman in her local business. Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement came with the Chicago Police Department and proceeded the deportation process. Many of the people who go to Benito Juarez are undocumented students, and they live with this fear for their entire life. So what are you going to do, if elected as mayor, to protect these undocumented students going into CPS schools?
Okay, so we see Gary McCarthy, Neil.
We need to have a pathway to make it easy for undocumented people to become documented. You have to want to be documented if you want to stay here. If an undocumented individual is arrested, convicted of a felony, after they serve their time, they should be deported. We should not protect criminals. My grandfather was undocumented. This is not a new issue. This is something that's been going on in this country for decades.
Okay, can we have Susana Mendoza?
Like, this is so personal to me. I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants. Let me say, I'm the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants. And, you know, Donald Trump just this last week announced a national emergency, and I feel like the only national emergency is Donald Trump and the racism and his stupid law. And let me say that as the mayor of this city, if Donald Trump wants to mess with our people, he's going to hit a wall, and it's called Susana Mendoza.
No one knows who's corrupt or who to trust or what you're saying is true. So how do I know if anyone in Chicago or believe in what you're saying when you're telling me this? You could go and be mayor and not represent what you're saying here.
Okay, so the first 4 people that I saw. You have to think about which candidates were here before media cameras were present and before election time. Were they on the front lines when schools were being closed? Did they lift up their voices when mental health clinics were being closed? Did they speak up when police misconduct was happening in our communities before the Palm McDonald's and even after?
I've always held myself to the highest level of integrity. I took on a governor of my own party and led the impeachment efforts against him. And I know it's silly season, these guys are running for office, but look, you know who I am. I've always been there. Okay,
thank you.
I'm sorry, I just really love that DJ there. Every meeting should have a DJ. So one of the things that when John and I were talking about this, we were really struck that for a documentary about an election, you take people who cannot vote, whether because of their age or because of their citizenship status, extremely seriously. And I was wondering if you could talk about the intersection between non-electoral politics, like this meeting, or, you know, there were youth protests against the police academy, and electoral politics. How do these come together in Chicago?
Yeah, well, that's another great question. It's just, you know, I think Chicago in America is the birthplace of community organizing. You know, it goes all the way back to Saul Alinsky. And I think you see that history very much alive in the present in Chicago. You know, I know that in the wake of George Floyd, there's been a lot of protests, of course, in many major cities and beyond major cities. And so it's become a much more of a national protest. But in Chicago, that's just standard procedure. And the activist community in Chicago is quite strong, and the young activist community is quite strong. And, you know, I'm always struck, I was struck when we did America to Me, but I was struck in this film as well by how engaged and informed young people are, even people who are not voting yet, like high school kids, like in that scene. There's a level of engagement here that, you know, and it's just about all progressive and quite progressive. And that, you know, that has an impact on who runs for office these days and what kind of tenure the mayor is going to have in office. I mean, protests really caused Rahm Emanuel to not run again. And much of that was youthful protest against him.
So some of those scenes were particularly devastating. You know, when Rahm was in the city council meeting and they were looking at funding the police academy, and so many kids were there who couldn't get in, and capturing that energy was really powerful and speaks exactly to the point that you're making here. I think it might be a good idea. What do you think, Modupe? Should we bring everybody in?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I'm going to kind of change the agenda a little bit. And I wonder, Cal, if you could, who's our amazing producer, Callum Brandon, if you could bring up the picture of John Lewis. So I just wanted, to kind of get us centered here. This is a picture of John Lewis. This is in Washington, D.C., where he's up over a building, on the top of a roof of a building, looking down at where Black Lives Matter is painted on the street. This is just north of the White House, and he's looking straight at the camera. So thank you very much. The next day, he would be going into the hospital. So as we talk, the killings of George Floyd by the police, the events of the summer of 2020, including COVID, including the deaths of of so many people, figures like John Lewis, are shaping our national conversation. So this is for all of you. How do you think that this kind of unprecedented experiences from May 2020 onwards, since the death of George Floyd, affect how audiences are engaging with your films? And what do you hope they will do after their films? So Dawn, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I mean, one thing I want to start with is about how deeply influenced I've been by Steve's movie making, and because I think what Steve does just brilliantly is those are riveting scenes to watch democracy in action. Something that if you said we're going to watch people object to speakers, would not get you a big old grant. But it's fascinating, right? And it shows the depth of partisanship and why, when people say, why can't we just get along? It shows you why. So, another thing I will say is Mr. Lewis was really affected by the number and significant protests around not only, as he pointed out, all 50 states and the world. And to see that before he passed away was such a gift for him. So I think when you make these movies, what my hope is always that people will be able to slow down and take in some of the details and be thoughtful about what they're seeing, but not only about what they're seeing in others, but what their role is in our democratic process. So that is actually the thing that I like people to take away, rather than do this or that or vote this or that. It's more participate, pay attention, and not feel so overwhelmed by the volume of information that is just, projected like a fire hose at people these days. Like what documentary does is it allows you to slow down and think about those small details, and how they're impacting all of us.
Should I go?
Yeah, why don't you go, Steve?
First of all, Don, I watched your film last week, and it's such a terrific film and such an important document that will live for a long time up in a very important man's life. So kudos to you for the film. One of the things we did we did an episode 5 that wasn't originally intended, where we went back out during the pandemic and during the upheaval around George Floyd, and we documented what was happening here in Chicago, much like what was happening around the country. And one of the things that really struck me about that time was, and I think this extends around the country, is, and particularly among young people, is that the identity politics that may have held more sway in the past are holding much less sway now. We have a Black gay woman mayor, which is historic here in Chicago, and she's got her hands full, not just with people who are more conservative, but people who are more progressive than her, and many of them are also African American people, and young people especially, who really want to hold her to account. And so I feel like one of our duties as filmmakers is to really capture as honestly and candidly, but empathically, that world that we're living in right now and what's going on out there. That it's important that it was important to us that you sort of understand what the mayor's going through in that last episode, but also understand where the opposition to her and the unhappiness with her comes from, and give credence to both of those things, because that's vital to our democracy, and I think it's vital to where we go going forward.
David, how about you?
Well, I'm just honored to be in the same room with Don and Steve always. I think that I would in a moment where we also have COVID, right, and that is affecting communities in different ways and many very unfairly, right? And sort of pulling the inequity that we see in this country to the forefront. What I think of these movies and these storytellers is how they provide such resilience for us, right, as audience. And I'm incredibly encouraged by the amount of people who are watching both Don's film and Steve's series. And I think that one of the things that's especially valuable to human beings as they see these works of art, right, is that they give you resilience, right? They help you, they allow you to see, right, that there is change that can come about and happen in times of unbelievable challenge, right? And I take a great, that it makes me optimistic in very difficult times, right? And so that's what I think that's one of the treasures of these two films, really, is what it's giving to the audience at a moment of real challenge, right, for many reasons.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, David. And I'm wondering for all of you now as we wind up the hour, what lies in store? I mean, especially within the context of the dual pandemics that 2020 embodies, and in terms of your goals for making films, how have your projects changed moving into the future? Have they changed at all? Or are you staying right on track with where you were?
Well, I'll jump in. One of the things that has become clearer and clearer to me over the past several years, but especially recently, is the need for filmmakers like myself, white, successful filmmakers, to tell more stories about how race and politics play out in white people's lives, because there's always been an interest on the part of our community, the documentary community, to look at people on the margins, to look at people of color and how it plays out there. So I feel a greater obligation to point my lens in that direction, and at the same time to also try to play a role to the degree that I can in fostering filmmakers of color, hiring filmmakers of color, mentoring if they want it from me. I don't force myself on anybody. Don will tell you I wouldn't do that, would I, Don? And so,
like begging, but
and so I just feel like these are things that I need to do as a filmmaker, both in the terms of the craft and the world of documentary filmmaking and subject matter.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, I feel similarly. One thing that is interesting is I'm thinking about David's comment about seeing around the corner. And, I think Steve's insight about the identity politics of the past are going to change. And we should be prepared for that and not shocked by it. And that's a really interesting political reality that I think is going to make for some good films. We're going to have different boxes to put around people. But I feel similar to Steve, not about the understanding white people part, like off you go, have a good time with that. But more about the, what can I do to make sure that we have a robust community of filmmakers, of all genders and ethnic backgrounds and economic backgrounds, because increasingly what's the most, the big divide for filmmakers is whether you can get economically resourced to tell your stories. So, and that becomes this, kind of echo chamber. So as much as I love all the work opportunities that I have, I want to make sure there's people who, are starting and really have something to say, who get the opportunity to work.
Well, we happen to have the CEO participant with us right now, David Lindy. So I'd like to provide the final thoughts for us today, David.
Well, I agree with all of the above and support all of the above, or everything that Don and Steve just said. But I think that for us, I was talking yesterday about trying to accelerate conversations and trying to accelerate engagement, right? And that can also be about the company, I think. And we've had, simply because of who we've been working with, one of the things that we found was that, between America to Me and When They See Us, which we were also part of, or the movie about Bryan Stevenson, Just Mercy, or John Lewis, we found ourselves suddenly, part of a very important conversation, right? And one of the which is incredibly valuable to the company, is we learn how to be the best version of what Jeff intended the company to accomplish. But I think that these conversations, when in my case, running a company, they have a different kind of value, which is the conversation that they can fuel within the company, right? And the kind of conversations that you can fuel about culture and values, right? And we find ourselves in that conversation. And I think about Steve and Don supporting other filmmakers, younger filmmakers, and things like that. And what I like to see happen through our work, no matter what film it is or what impact campaign that we're working for, is that our culture is advancing with the country's culture, right? And that we're engaging we're sort of building new young leaders, right? Who will take the work of Don and Steve in the future, and who will take Jeff's vision for what content can accomplish and take it throughout the world, quite honestly, right? And do it in an authentic and compassionate way that will really fuel the kind of work that we're all doing. And that excites me tremendously. It makes me super excited to see, people who are younger than me engage so passionately, right? And believe so strongly and really want to make change. And I learn a ton from it every day. It's really very valuable.
I mean, they have a tremendous culture there at Participant. My running joke with David is that when am I going to get my office there? But some of the work they're doing, and it certainly it applies to far beyond me, but it applies to both America to Me and City Surreal, is they're doing the kinds of things that nobody else is doing. Yeah. Pure and simple, and that need to be done. But that even now, even though the marketplace is more embracing, they're not quite embracing enough.
Well, both of the films that we've discussed today and the range of films and projects and campaigns that we've heard about from Participant all speak to hope, to a future for brilliant creators and people to develop films that can make a difference. And so it's been such a pleasure for us to have just an hour to speak with the three of you. Is way too short an amount of time, but we really appreciate your time. And we want to thank everyone who's tuned in for this discussion today as well. At the National Museum of American History, we know that entertainment has power to bring people together, document our journey as a nation, and serve as an engine of social and political change. And so we'd like for you to stay tuned for more information about the forthcoming Entertaining America exhibition that will tell more of these stories and feature some of your favorite objects in film, television, sports, theater, and music, and how they relate to this ongoing relationship between entertainment and social change. In the meantime, please visit our American Scene website at the link below to read the oral histories we've collected in preparation for the exhibition, including David's. You'll see the banner below, and thank you for joining us, and enjoy your afternoon. And thanks to all of you again for participating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.